Hey, IT changemakers, and welcome to the DEX Show with Tom McGraw. Let's get into it.
Kay Firth-Butterfield, welcome to the DEX Show. Absolutely wonderful to have you on. How are you?
I'm fine. I have a slight cold, so forgive me for that.
Sorry to hear that. So, do you know, Kay, I was familiar with your writing for some time. We've been wanted you on the show for some time, but I never knew you were English. I always assumed you were American. And at the moment, we've got this streak of English guests, and everyone's going to think we've become like an Anglo podcast. So I was, but you are based in America, is that right? Or am I
I am based in America, and I have been since 2008, so quite a long time, but the accent's still here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And whereabouts in the States are you?
I live in the Northeast,
Lovely.
so I have snow on the ground.
Fantastic. And another thing, so I was refreshing my memory on your bio, right, as they say, and I kind of already had a note that you were the first chief AI ethics officer.
Yeah.
But when I was refreshing these notes, I saw it was back in 2014. Okay, yeah,
Yes,
who
I
was
knew.
nobody? How did that happen? What was that? What was that?
Well, I think that was just that I had, I'm a human rights barrister
Mm,
by background. I still co-chair the work at my chambers in Doughty Street, London, on AI and human rights. And I had been working a great deal in human trafficking. And this is actually before Westworld. And so they, uh, I had started reading about artificial intelligence. My husband's a computer scientist.
mhm.
And I've been thinking about, if we created humanoid robots, would we want to traffic humans anymore? And so I got myself into this big thought process about, okay, so we might have super intelligence, and what would that mean for humans? And how would AI help us? And how might it hinder us? And that was back in 2010 or so. Uh, the last chapter of my book from that period, which was on human rights, actually had this thought experiment in it. And then in 2013, Stephen Hawking said in the Times that AI might be the best thing that humans ever do, or it might be the last thing that we ever do. And I happened to be on a plane 10 hours from London to Austin, Texas, where we lived at the time. And I sat next to the CEO of an AI startup. And I was perhaps one of, I don't know, 10 people in the world who could have talked to him about this issue. And he offered me that job, which of course didn't exist at the time. So we had to come up with a title um, as we were coming into land in Austin.
Well, that's an amazing way indeed. That's an amazing entrance to discuss your very unique career history, right? As you say, human rights barrister, right?
Yeah.
Seeking into AI, conceptual specialist. And if I can just ask you, so I want to hone in on what you just said. So you were specializing in the issue of human trafficking.
I was human rights and human trafficking. That's what I was
Human trafficking.
teaching at the time at the university in Austin.
And so just to clarify for my own understanding, you saw in AI a potential technology that could replace the need, as it were, for human trafficking. Do I have that approximately right?
Yes,
Like it
that's right. Yeah. Yes. I mean, if
simply
we
put,
have
because
humanoid robots, as we saw when the Westworld series came out, maybe we're going to abuse them and not human beings. I think I've since come to the view that maybe as a species we should just grow up and not abuse anybody. But it would certainly be better not to abuse people if I have to make a choice.
it reminds me a little bit. There was a Christopher Hitchens quote I remember reading years and years ago about it was about if it was about the issue of animal cruelty.
Yeah.
He said that obviously that only exists because people suppose that animals experience something because they experience something like consciousness
Yeah.
because otherwise they might well take it out on a toaster. Was it
Yeah.
was it
Absolutely. Well, interestingly, I sit on the board of a small nonprofit called Earth Species Project. And what we are doing is we're using machine learning to discover a large language model to discover animal language. And our purpose in discovering animal language is to see whether we can actually find out what they're saying to one another and whether we could communicate with them. And
fascinating?
so, there's a lot of talk about in AI about, oh, it might be sentient or becoming sentient, but we actually do have a lot of sentient beings on our planet already, and we're not talking to them. So that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, before trying to invent someone to talk to, we might try talking to the creatures already around us. Well, that'd be a very awkward moment considering our history of behavior towards animals, wouldn't it? If they suddenly-
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that it raises as well, responsible AI questions because supposing we do get to talk to whales, do they then say, well, we'd rather not be talked to, and we don't much like your species after anyway, because look at what you've been doing to us. You know, but if we get it right, it will fundamentally change the conversation that we have about the planet.
Indeed, it would. And so I'm curious, Kate, given that rather deep background in thinking about and indeed working directly with AI, or what we, I guess, at this point maybe think of as like early nascent forms of AI compared to the acceleration we've seen in the last, what, 3, 4 years in particular. What has that experience been like for you? I mean, where were you when the LLM was first unleashed, and what did that mean for you? Were you like, oh, finally, exactly what I've been anticipating all this time, or was it arresting and striking? What was that?
Oh, I mean, I was working for the World Economic Forum at the time. I was leading AI and then eventually quantum at the World Economic Forum. And I think the first thing the it's exciting, and to see AI get better, maybe. We could have conversations about whether it's getting better or not. And I am a great believer that, if we get AI right, it will fundamentally change and help humans and the planet. But if we don't get it right and we don't put in the right guardrails, both for our home, the way we use it at home and in our lives, and the way we use it in business, then that might not be the impact. And so um, I was at Davos the in 2024, and everybody wanted to talk about LLMs, whether they knew anything about it or not. They wanted to talk about it.
Yeah, the full schedule at Davos. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting to note that, I was there this in last month, the month before. And one of the things that's happened is that, we went from people were talking about it who didn't really understand it, a lot of hype over 2 years. And then this year, there is much more. Everybody's not got AI all over the houses. They've got, we can help you reach your ROI with AI on the houses. And I think that that's showing a sort of maturation of how we're seeing AI develop across business.
Well, your recent book, right, coexisting with AI, work, love, and play in a changing world. Obviously, it's quite a holistic narrative. So, interested before we kind of drill into your insights around AI in the workplace, specifically looking at it a little bit more holistically and thinking about those guardrails as you just articulated it. Um,
Yeah, sure.
Outside of the workplace, where the guardrails become most important in your view before we go into the workplace specifically?
Yeah, certainly. So, the reason that the way that I the reason I wrote the book is that I believe that there are many people who are struggling in the workplace because they're not getting the proper training to use AI. They're worried that they're going to lose their job to it. They don't understand it. And so, therefore, they don't understand that it can help them do their job, and they won't necessarily lose their job because of it. And so, I wanted really to ensure that everybody could pick up this book and learn something and have a conversation and really have a say in how we humans go forward with AI. Because of that, and also because I'm a crazy Shakespeare fan, I base the book on the Jake Boy's speech in As You Like It, the seven stages of man. And so I start by obviously looking at what the technology is. But then I go into looking at infants and AI, schoolboy, lover, soldier, business person, justice and society, and then into old age and healthcare. And so um, I just some things to pick out of that. Uh, we're being asked as parents and grandparents to buy toys for the under sixes. The under sixes are in that stage where they're creating their beliefs, values, and attitudes. And, how do we think about ensuring that they are able to communicate and work in teams with other human beings if actually they have a toy that is always sycophantic and loves them all the time and doesn't ever make them cry, and then they have to go and talk to humans. So when we're thinking about the future of work and future workforce, it actually is starting at that point of how do we think about educating our very youngest children. And then if we go into the student portion, we're what we're seeing is that uh, AI is everywhere in the curriculum. There is no good evidence that it is actually helping us learn. And what we do know, because there is now some evidence, is that if we write things down, we learn it better than if we type things. And if we spend too much time outsourcing our homework um, to AI, then we're not learning anything. And I was at a major university giving a speech 2 weeks ago, and a professor of law and a professor of AI both said we have problems amongst our seniors because we don't actually think that they know enough to get their degree, and yet they have passed all the exams along the way. And one particular the AI professor said, one of my seniors brought me code the other day and asked me to explain it to him. And I said, well, shouldn't you be explaining it to me? And he couldn't because he had always used an LLM to code for him.
Mm.
So
Okay, right.
these sort of things that then feed into how we think about employment. Because, in the past, we've always said, oh, you've got an undergraduate degree, you've got some critical thinking skills, you've got some analytical skills, you've learned something, you bring these skills into the workplace. But maybe people don't bring those skills into the workplace. They don't bring the ability to work in teams, the things that we value in human workforce. And so maybe we have to think very differently about how we train our new workers.
I'm desperate to get into the workplace with you a little further, but you just snagged my attention with this mention of the university system because
Yeah.
obviously one of the difference is there is they can impose, if you're a dean at a university, if you're a university, you can impose whatever learning regime you like. You can limit the way people use technology, and you can think about the way people are tested. For instance, Kay, I've always thought that the oral exam, right, which was the traditional
Yeah.
approach, right? People would have their, what was it even called, the Viva or something. You would stand there
Yes,
and you have to
absolutely.
field questions. Obviously, PhD students, that's still the case, I think, isn't it? But
Yeah.
maybe that more oral approach to examination is going to come back in for undergraduates or something. I mean, what, just from your experience of talking to professors and thinking about it obviously so deeply, is that one of the directions you think is inevitable, and
I
any other?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what a lot of people are doing, having noticed this, is saying, we can't stop you using it because you're going to use it. What we can do is we can tell you that it'll get you a B grade, but it won't get you the next level up because that requires some extra thinking at the moment. Um, but we could restructure the way that classes are. This will work in smaller universities, but it won't work in some of the big American universities where you have 100 people in a class or more than 100 people in a class. But if you've got smaller classes, you can get the homework done and then you can make them explain what they are doing, what they learnt, and defend what they said in their homework in class. And that is certainly a way to begin to think about this.
Yeah.
And I certainly when I was at university there were 7 people in my tutorial, and so then you there was nowhere to hide. But obviously for the big universities, it's a different thing, and so then maybe it's rethinking how you examine.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And okay, so let's go into the workplace. I mean, you already mentioned, but one of the implications here is that new employees or graduates in particular, maybe you don't necessarily have the luxury of assuming they're going to bring critical thinking skills or any solid knowledge base. And h- so, how do we address that first of all? I guess is the at the gate. What's the first thing
I
we
think
have
out
to
of
be
the
exposed to?
gate, we are not doing a good job generally of teaching AI 101 to people. And so we need to be doing that immediately. But we also need to be assessing our new employees when they come in for what they know about AI and how they use it. So, 25% of American men are said to be in an intimate relationship with a chatbot. 72% of teens are in some form of relationship with a chatbot. That's maybe as a companion or as an intimate companion. Or they know somebody who is. And I guess that might be a parent, for example. But what does that do? When you bring that into the workplace, how are you thinking about the AI tools that you're using in the workplace? It's very different from the way that you or I might think about using AI in the workplace because we don't have that intimate connection with it. So I think that that's something that we have to really think about as we are taking young people into our companies at the moment, and then retraining them to remember that this is a machine and you should be using it to help you, but not to do all of your work, because otherwise we're seeing work slop from that, we see hallucinations from that, and all of those are really bad for business and bad for your bottom line.
Absolutely. So let's start with the HR element, I guess, of like, so you have these employees as you put it, intimate relationships with AI is becoming normalized, and I'm trying to picture what the challenges that causes for the workplace might be. Is my assumption that there's like the danger of excessive fluidity between a work tool and a personal tool, Kay, for
Well,
instance, and
that's not.
this kind of which draws attention to the kind of notion of like the workplace LLM is against the out of work. Talk to us about that fluidity and how leaders should be aware of it and should be thinking about it and preparing to encourage better discrimination between the two, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you come into using AI in the workplace, from a point where it's your best friend or it's
Mhm.
your intimate partner, then you have forgotten that it is a tool that you need to check on and that hallucinates and that doesn't always give you the right answer. Um, a- and and so you you've you've lost your ability to interact with it wisely in the workplace because you have suspended all of the things that you should know about how to use AI, including the fact that it's a machine and it's not your best friend or your lover, or it perhaps shouldn't be your best friend or your lover. I was at a I was at a conference in January, where the CEO of the Kinsey Institute said, if we keep going on like this, it will be an existential crisis for human beings.
Yes, no doubt. No doubt about it. And the allusion to work slope as well as a result of this, regular listeners will know I'm often quite preoccupied with what I suspect is going to be a crisis in quality control in the workplace.
Yeah.
And that one of the AI delivers quantity, often to the detriment of quality. And your thoughts on that theme are very welcome. And also, what does that mean? What does that imply for leaders? What does that imply for organizational structures?
Yeah, well, I think I think, the HBR article says that, it takes up to 1 hour and 50 minutes to put right some of this stuff. And so what I don't think that companies are doing well is looking at the cost benefit of AI and what they think about efficiency and resilience. So they might be being efficient using AI, but are they actually resilient using AI where you've got work slop, where you've got people who haven't been educated properly about how to use the tools? And what's the cost benefit? It may be that AI is really good as a tool in your organization for writing emails, and you don't care if there are hallucinations in the emails. But if there are hallucinations in documents in your finance department, you probably do care about that. But I'm not seeing companies doing that assessment either correctly or at all. So, and that then feeds into this work slop thing. But also, I think it affects your bottom line and it perhaps affects your brand value as well. Um, and it's going to be worse if people are not thinking about how they constrain their agents as they are using them. And we all know that agents can, if you don't constrain them properly, and you don't uh, allow um, and retrain them, then you end up with this terrible problem of them be going off piste. Um, and there's a recent IDC report that suggests that by 2030, 20% of the leading companies of the world will have been sued because of their agents.
Mm, fascinating. Um, let's think about CIOs and head of EEM and head of IT, people in charge of distributing this technology and hopefully managing adoption and monitoring safety and such like. Um, what would you say are the key government governance decisions around employee AI that will matter most in the next 12 to 24 months specifically?
Yeah, I would say certainly the the uh the what you need is not CIOs or CTOs being in charge. What you need is a good internal committee that includes everybody across all the silos who can really get a grip on where AI is being used, why it's being used, whether it's being used effectively, where you need training. All of these sort of things are incredibly important for a company. And leaving it to the CTO or the CIO, what you're doing is actually sort of leaving it in the hands of the people who are being told to deploy it. So you need to give them some support because they're being told to deploy it, and yet there are problems with that deployment. And so really making sure that there is a cross company um, committee working on it. The best the best deployments of AI that I see have that, and the best deployments of AI that I see come in companies that are already regulated. They understand the regulatory procedures. So you see, banks and insurance companies, they've really got this on the whole because they already understand what problems can be from the regulation. And I think, and I to give you an example of training and that fluidity that you talked about earlier, shadow AI, that's where the employee brings their own AI into the company and is using that instead. And already, I have advised a company on whether they will be sued successfully because an employee used a shadow AI. And just to give you give you that example, it was a company making safety critical systems, and the employee used their own AI version of AI on their phone to decide how big the valve should be. And when it was all installed, the valve blew up and it blew noxious fumes and content all over people and the site. So, what they said to me, "Well, are we going to get sued? And if we're sued, are we going to lose?" And I said, "Well, what rules have you got about shadow AI, about your employee using this?" And of course, they had no rules at all. So, of course, they're going to get sued. And yet, it would be really simple to have a rule about shadow AI.
Is there okay? So, what kind of rules should you have? And like because you can fall out the left side of a right side of a boat, can't you? There can be a excess and as much as there can be
Yeah. I mean,
sufficiency.
for that, you could just simply say, you are only allowed to use the tools that we give you. You are not allowed to use any AI tools that are not supplied by the company. And you might, because it's quite critical, if people do, you might want to add that it's a sackable offense. It's extremely simple to put that into your handbook, your HR handbook.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I guess then visibility, though, it becomes hugely important for organizations. I mean, do you think that in most companies at the moment, they don't really know who's doing or using what? And that's part of the problem, part of the overall picture.
Yes, I do. I do think that that's part of the problem, and that goes back to training. We're not training people well enough to understand the problems that they might be encountering, and we are not in many companies, there are no guidelines at all. And having some guidelines and some training would actually help most of this.
For sure. And, there's got to be one thing I've spoken to sort of thinkers on AI, they often emphasize the need for freedom of experimentation, particularly in organizations, the dissolution of traditional silos and professional silos, and just wanting all your employees to feel that freedom of, that AI gives you, of being able to do in many ways almost anything. And so is there some tension of sorts between, the need to give people that kind of autonomy and the need to make sure they don't violate certain important rules and boundaries, and how do you strike that balance, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. There are. And I think that goes back to my risk and benefit, resilience and efficiency comments. You know, you do you need everybody to be using AI all over the organization all the time? If you do, then you need to put in some governance, unless you say, I have done my cost risk analysis, and it doesn't matter to me if there are lots of hallucinations in my finance reports, or there are hallucinations in reports that I give out to my clients. And we have seen where companies have passed on to clients hallucinated material. That is not good for your business, and it's certainly not good for your bottom line. And also, I think that one of the things that people are not thinking about sufficiently is, if you have hallucinations um, in your internal material, those are actually going into your proprietary data and can be called upon by any other employee. And so then you get double hallucinations or triple hallucinations. And those are the things that I think that companies are not dealing with, or are not dealing with well.
Mm.
And so how would you allow employees to innovate as well, as well as having some rules? I think you have to have some basic rules. You have to make a decision as a company about what are your red lines. And then you have to think about how you train everybody so that they understand the red lines, and then can experiment understanding the red lines. There are also ways that I've seen companies do this. One would be putting training an AI ambassador in each part of the company. And so that person knows how AI might be really well used in, for example, finance, or and so then they can help other employees in that department to think about innovating with AI. Another way that I've seen that works well is taking a group of employees, often from different departments, and saying, here's an AI tool, use it, see what you can do with it, make yourself into a relational group, a support group. And then from there, it means that that person can go on to be that ambassador in that department.
Mm, mm. I'm interested that this is maybe a curveball for you, but I think you'll be all right, Kay. I think it'll be great. If we were to fast forward like 5 years in the workplace specifically,
Mhm.
um, what do you think would surprise us, not in terms of what AI is making possible, but in terms of what those guardrails might look like when our workplaces have been, our economies, if you will, have been through crises coming from this technology, have learnt the hardest lessons, and in some areas AI has been contracted, and it's not just extrapolated everywhere. Would there be elements that would surprise us about um, caution and reversion in AI as much as its potentialities?
Yeah, I think if we see some big failures, then people are going to pull back.
Mm.
The problem at the moment is everybody has invested so much money in AI that it's hard to think about pulling back. And there's this sort of push. So I was asked by a company the other day to um, talk to them about being on an advisory board, and they said, we'd like to pick up this conversation with you after we've deployed agents. And I said, well, probably we should have this conversation before we done
The
with
horse, the AI horse is bolted, I'm afraid. Yeah.
And so I do feel that there is in that case, if people begin to have problems with it, what we're going to see is much more training. It's much more thoughtful. It would be much more thoughtful about where you're using it and how you're using it. So those things about efficiency and resilience would come into play, I think, at that stage.
And what do you think organizations are perhaps underestimating about the distinctly human consequences of AI adoption, but beyond these issues of productivity and efficiency?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, we are beginning to see people call out what are uniquely human skills. And you see CEOs saying, um, human attitude, the ability to create relationships and work in teams is important for as an important human skill. The I think we should add to that the ability to know and be able to check from hallucinations. And then just recently, Daniela Amondi said that one of the things that she felt we should all be doing is reading humanities rather than science. Um, and that, sea change. Um,
Yeah.
and that would enable us to work more successfully with AI.
That's so interesting. Yeah, that's fascinating. Um, Speaking of the humanities, Kay, I just there's no other way to drop it in. But have you read or seen the movies Dune? Do you?
June.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
I've read you Frank Herbert.
Yes, quite so, quite so.
Yes. Yes,
Sort
I
of,
read them many years ago, and I've seen both movies. Yes.
and the workplace Butlerian jihad is approximately maybe a partial one, not a complete one, but it presents it just occasionally. What you were saying makes me think: are we approaching some partial Butlerian jihad, at least in certain areas of life, over the next few years? So,
Well, I think that, the one that we probably should be thinking about if we're thinking about humanity is to use another sci-fi, the emergency medical hologram from Star Trek. And, do we want what jobs do we want to keep as human jobs?
mm,
And so, where in medicine, for example, do you deploy an AI, and where do you keep the person? And I think that those are the sort of conversations we're really not having. We're sort of blundering ahead with AI without saying, okay, so I really like a human in this circumstance. There was a wonderful article in the New York Times, I don't know, last year, where a surgeon had said, look, I could get AI to tell people that they're going to die. All I learn is a script, and it will probably be more empathic delivering this script than I am. But is that what we want for our future?
pertinent questions, Kay. Absolutely delighted you were able to finally come on. It's been fascinating talking to you. Where can people find you, your work, your book, etc.? I know it's so obvious nowadays. You LinkedIn and Amazon,
I'm on
but
LinkedIn, and the website is just kayfirthbutterfield.com. So it's really easy. And the book, of course, is on Amazon and Barnes& Noble and Waterston. And
you
anyway,
wrote it all yourself, no doubt, Kay. Every line there.
so I wrote every line
There's
myself.
no LLMs involved.
It was actually in my contract that I did.
That's it for this week's DEX Show. We'll be back next week. And if you don't already, be sure to follow the show so you don't miss an episode. Until next time.